Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, you already know that keeping up with global news can feel like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Oh, absolutely.
Next.
Especially with what's unfolding right now.
Right. We're looking at a stack of sources covering day 6 of the rapidly escalating U.S.-Israel war with Iran. But today, we're taking a completely different approach to this material.
Yeah, a much more specific lens.
Exactly. We have a unique mission for this deep dive. We are going to look at this massive geopolitical crisis from an English learning perspective.
Which is such a vital way to process the news.
It really is. We'll be decoding the geopolitical events, the economic shockwaves, and the human stories, all by mastering the exact English vocabulary the international media uses to report on them.
Because understanding the specific vocabulary of global news, it isn't just about language comprehension. It's a vital tool for critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
The words that journalists choose to use, they quietly dictate how we perceive the reality of conflict. So when you master these terms, you start seeing beyond the headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start by mapping out the geopolitics, specifically the military jargon. That's the what of the situation.
Right, the tactical language.
According to the reporting, by day 6, this conflict has rapidly spread. It's pulled in 5 key nations now: Iran, the UAE, Azerbaijan, Qatar, and Lebanon.
It's a massive footprint.
It is. And to grasp the scale, we need to look at 2 specific words the media is using heavily right now: barrage and intercept.
Let's start with barrage. It's important to differentiate from a word like strike or attack.
How so?
Well, in a military and journalistic context, a barrage implies a concentrated, heavy attack.
Yeah.
It's an overwhelming delivery of munitions over a wide area designed to saturate a location's defenses.
Has a weight to it.
Exactly, a psychological weight of relentlessness.
And the numbers coming out of the United Arab Emirates certainly fit that description. The sources say the UAE faced a literal barrage of 137 drones and 7 missiles.
137 drones, that is
staggering, right? Conceptualizing that volume of hardware in the airspace at once. Most were stopped, but not all. It resulted in injuries to 6 foreign workers.
right.
And the word the media universally uses for stopping those weapons is our second term: intercept. For example, Qatar reported intercepting 13 missiles, with 1 falling into the sea.
The term intercept is fascinating because it's just so incredibly clinical.
It sounds like a sports term.
It does, or a math term.
Yeah.
It simply means to obstruct something, to prevent it from reaching its destination. But in the context of ballistic missile defense, it sanitizes the event.
It strips away the reality.
Exactly. You don't think about massive explosions over populated areas or flaming debris falling from the sky. It makes a terrifying event sound like a clean, logistical transaction.
That clinical framing connects perfectly to another phrase we're seeing everywhere in today's sources: defensive operations.
Ah, yes, a classic.
The UK announced they are sending 4 additional Typhoon fighter jets to Qatar to, quote, strengthen defensive operations.
That phrase is such a powerful rhetorical tool. Calling it defensive operations categorizes military deployment not as an escalation, but as an act of guarding.
A shield, basically.
Exactly, a linguistic shield. It lets a government signal strength to its allies while telling its domestic voters, hey, we aren't instigating a new offensive war.
Right. Now, the rhetoric gets even more tangled when we look at how different nations weaponize the term drone attack.
The situation with Azerbaijan is a perfect example of this.
It is. It shows how a single event generates entirely conflicting narratives. So Azerbaijan claims that for the first time, it was hit by Iranian drones.
A drone attack just referring to an assault using unmanned aerial vehicles.
Right. And Azerbaijan points the finger directly at Tehran. Now, to be clear to you listening, we are just impartially reporting what the sources say here, not taking sides.
Right, we're looking at the language they use.
Exactly. So Iran's foreign ministry issues a forceful denial. But they don't just say, we didn't do it.
No, they actively pivot the narrative. They accuse the what they call the Zionist regime of orchestrating the attacks to disrupt relations among Muslim countries.
So again, without validating either claim, it's wild to see how drone attack transforms from a physical military event into a geopolitical tool.
It's used to either build alliances or isolate enemies.
Now, as we look at the Lebanon front, the vocabulary shifts dramatically. The sources report severe Israeli airstrikes, over 100 people killed, more than 600 wounded. Roads around Beirut are clogged.
A very different linguistic picture.
Very. Israel claims the southern suburbs they are hitting are, quote, strongholds of the Iran-backed Hezbollah.
What's fascinating here is how the language of the news scales.
What do you mean by scale?
Well, look at the geography. Over the Gulf, officials use targeted, organized words like defensive operations and intercept.
Right.
But in the very next paragraph, talking about Lebanon, the terminology shifts to massive regional involvement. Strongholds, casualties, entire suburbs being leveled. The vocabulary scales in intensity as the conflict widens.
That's a great observation. And that widening doesn't just stay on the battlefield. That brings us to section 2, the economic ripple effects. The so what for the listener.
Because a war thousands of miles away instantly hits your wallet.
Exactly. And the media explains this using financial terminology, starting with market volatility.
Volatility is basically a metric of uncertainty.
How so?
In financial reporting, market volatility describes rapid, unpredictable fluctuations in asset prices. Markets crave predictability. When a war erupts, investors can't forecast if supply chains will hold, so they panic.
And we saw that panic. Asian stock markets tumbled while US and UK markets saw slight bumps. But the term that really hits home is wholesale market prices.
The wholesale market is where the panic becomes quantifiable for everyday people.
Right, because wholesale prices are the baseline costs businesses pay before marking things up for consumers. The UK wholesale market prices for gas nearly doubled in just a few days.
Halfway to the levels we saw during the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Which is a massive shock.
It is. Yeah. And to understand why that shock is happening, we have to look at a crucial geographic and economic term. Choke point.
Such an evocative phrase.
It really is. In global logistics, a choke point is a narrow, highly strategic route, usually a waterway that's vital for shipping, but inherently vulnerable to being blocked.
And the Straits of Hormuz is the ultimate choke point.
Arguably the most critical one on the planet for energy. And right now, it's effectively impassable.
The sources describe this real-time marine traffic map. Usually it's full of red triangles. Those are the oil tankers moving through the strait.
But now
they've just stopped. They've dropped anchor outside the danger zone. They won't proceed because it's simply not safe.
And that physical paralysis triggers our next vocabulary word, insurance costs.
Because sitting near a war zone isn't cheap.
Exactly. Commercial shipping relies on maritime insurance.
Yeah.
When ships loiter near drone barrages, the insurance costs, as the reporting puts it, go through the roof.
And that cost gets baked into the price of the cargo. Which brings us to a really surprising economic detail involving the word byproduct.
This is the one that caught me off guard.
Right. So a byproduct is a secondary substance created incidentally during the manufacturing of something else.
And in this context, the byproduct causing a panic is urea.
Urea, which is a byproduct of the Gulf's petrochemical industry. But why is a petrochemical byproduct making global headlines?
Because urea is a vital fertilizer for global agriculture.
So what does this all mean?
It means if this shortage continues, if those ships can't move through the choke point, it directly impacts global food prices. We're hitting the exact time of year this fertilizer is needed.
So a regional conflict instantly becomes a global kitchen table issue. A drone barrage in the Middle East dictates the price of your groceries.
It's entirely interconnected. But we can't just stick to the macroeconomics. That terminology can feel a bit detached.
Right. We need to talk about the WHO. The human cost on the ground.
Shifting to the humanitarian vocabulary.
Exactly. The sources provide a real window into Iran right now, and the defining phrase used by reporters is a tumult of emotions.
Tumult is a powerful word.
It is.
It doesn't just mean sad or scared. It refers to a state of profound confusion and incredibly complex agitation, holding conflicting desires at the same time.
And the reporting illustrates this perfectly. You have people in Iran who protested in January. They desperately want the Islamic Republic to change,
right?
But they absolutely do not want that change to come through war or through their country being attacked. That clash of desires is the tumult.
To really feel that, we have to look at the words citizens are using. During the internet shutdown in Tehran, reporters got voice messages out, and people described feeling trapped.
Trapped, and they described the ongoing blasts as fatiguing.
Fatiguing, that carries so much weight.
It implies a systemic drain. One resident said the blasts literally, quote, swallow a chunk of your energy.
But human psychology is so complex. The sources also show a totally contrasting perspective from Tehran.
The rooftop watch parties.
Yes, the surreal normalization of it all.
Right. Another resident said people sit on their rooftops at 9 p.m. waiting for the strikes. They whistle and wave goodbye to the fighter jets.
They feel they've gotten used to it after the previous 12-day war with Israel.
It's jarring. But for the people actively trying to flee, the media uses a different set of vocabulary. Words like evacuate versus stranded.
This highlights a severe imbalance of power. The U.S. ordered people around its embassy in Qatar to evacuate.
Organized, state-sanctioned movement to safety.
Exactly. But if you don't have that state backing, you aren't evacuated. You're stranded, like Elaine in Vietnam.
Right, a global traveler stranded because her flights were canceled twice, left completely helpless, and even when governments do step in for a repatriation flight,
Returning someone to their home country?
it can still be chaotic. A British passenger described their delayed repatriation flight from Oman as a shambles.
A shambles. That is such a specific, evocative piece of British vocabulary.
It paints a picture of total institutional disorder.
And this is why understanding this vocabulary matters. Words like trapped, stranded, a shambles. They help us discuss humanitarian issues with formal empathy, rather than just relying on cold military jargon.
It grounds the politics in human reality, which sets up our final section. The global entanglements, moments from the sources.
Because this conflict is refusing to stay local.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The vocabulary here gets wild. Let's look at the word torpedoed.
A very definitive military term. To torpedo a vessel means to attack and destroy it using an underwater missile, usually from a submarine.
The sources note an Iranian naval destroyer was torpedoed by an American submarine, but it's the location that's insane.
Just outside Sri Lanka's territorial waters.
Exactly. The surviving sailors are in Sri Lankan hospitals. A U.S.-Iran naval clash in the Indian Ocean. The footprint is massive.
And politically, it's just as entangled.
The U.S. political angle, Trump's interview with Axios.
Right. Trump stated he needs to be personally involved in choosing Iran's next leader. He called the potential choice of Mojtaba Khamenei, the assassinated supreme leader's son, unacceptable.
To have a U.S. figure openly vetoing internal Iranian succession shows how deeply intertwined this all is.
But the most surprising entanglement has to be Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. The sources say the U.S. approached Ukraine's President Zelensky for help coping with drone strikes.
Because Ukraine has been enduring Russian drone barrages for years. Zelensky offered to help, but
he's facing his own crisis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to munitions.
Patriot missiles.
Exactly. The systems used to intercept missiles over the Middle East use the exact same munitions Zelensky desperately needs for his own war against Russia. Every missile sent to Qatar is one not sent to Ukraine.
It's all connected, from Sri Lanka to Vietnam to Ukraine. The vocabulary of this conflict writes the story as the whole world right now.
It really does.
And with that, we're wrapping up today's deep dive. You have successfully navigated a complex geopolitical crisis, tracked the economic shockwaves, and felt the human impact.
And you did it by mastering the critical English vocabulary used to report it. Terms like barrage, choke point, and a shambles.
Understanding these terms empowers you to consume global news more critically.
And with greater empathy.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about how the language of news shapes our perception of reality. We regularly use clinical terms like defensive operations or supply chain disruptions. They sound neat, organized, distant.
Safe, almost.
Right. But as we heard from the voices on the ground, the reality is a tumult of emotions. It's feeling trapped and living in a shambles.
The raw human reality.
Consider how the vocabulary you consume every day might actually distance you from that reality. Could changing the words we use change how we respond to global crises? Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.
喜欢这种学习方式，欢迎订阅我的频道，让我们一起用下一个10分钟把商业英文变简单。